Our second speaker on the Seleucid Empire and our final speaker of the day, Dr. Sonja Richter, was a student in ancient history at Bochum and Kiel, and in fact was a student of our keynote speaker for tomorrow, Josef Wiesehofer, with a dissertation on Seleucid rule in the eastern satrapies of Iran. Since 2014, she has served as a tenured faculty member in ancient history at the Historisches Institut of the University of Duisburg-Essen. Her scholarship has examined Achaemenid royal titles, Seleucid queens, whom we just heard about as well. So I guess our last two speakers have Stratonike in common as a research topic, and as part of her expertise on Herrschaft in the Seleucid world. Today's lecture is entitled Seleucid Encounters with the Iranian World, Religious and Cultic Elements in the Administration and Ruling of the Seleucid East. Dr. Richter.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Alexa and Rahim, for the invitation to this symposium and the opportunity to present my work. I am very thankful, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here at the symposium. Among the Hellenistic kingdoms that followed Alexander III, the Seleucid dynasty plays a special role. In contrast to the other Diadochoi, the founder of the dynasty, Seleucus, himself a true Macedonian, had to deal with a special situation and unique conditions in his spear-gained territory, particularly in the eastern parts. He was not able to draw on existing Greek or Macedonian traditions, but was confronted with an area composed on various indigenous people. These had their own origins and rights, especially in terms of cultic or religious traditions. Focusing on the Seleucid eastern territories, that is the satrapies between Mesopotamia and Bactria, it becomes clear that there were different stages of cultural encounters between the ruling Greco-Macedonian dynasty and their indigenous Iranian subjects. This kind of diversity is most evident in how Seleucid rule was understood. Especially in the eastern regions, a certain kind of independency, or at least the right to be heard, was customary, particularly under the preceding Achaemenids. Based on the enormous extent of the Achaemenid Empire, the rulers were not able to subject every region to total control. Instead, they established a system of indirect rule based on appointing satraps, usually of Persian origin. Within the satrapy, the ruling system was mostly based on local and indigenous procedures and therefore differed from satrapy to satrapy. However, the system also created a lot of potential for local power bases and secessions, for therefore latently unstable from the beginning. When Alexander entered Asia, he was not interested in taking the time to install a new system of control. Instead, he basically rushed through Asia from west to east, fighting a few battles, pillaging and marrying indigenous women along the way. From the perspective of his Seleucid successors, Alexander's imperial rule in Asia created many disadvantages because his random way of dealing with conquered areas had supported tendencies for local independencies and secessions. When Seleucus established the Seleucid kingdom in Babylonia after his victory over Antigonus in 311-310 BCE, he was confronted with the huge task to secure Asia. In today's presentation, I will therefore trace how the Seleucid kings tried to establish and enforce their rule in the Iranian world. We will start by taking a closer look at the marriage strategies of the Seleucid family in the first two generations, and will then focus on two additional and, in my view, crucial aspects of Seleucid rule. First, the encounters with cultic and religious traditions, where I will concentrate on syncretic tendencies of Greek and indigenous deities. And second, the representation of imperial rule via iconographic elements of Seleucid coinage. The overall aim of this presentation is to identify the Greco-Macedonian and local Eastern influences in the Seleucid Empire to evaluate the specific role of the Iranian world. A note of caution is, however, required. The ancient sources for the Seleucids especially are very rare. In contrast to the other diadochoi, Seleucus' area of activity was not the focus of the ancient Greek and Roman authors. We may get a few information from literary sources, the main sources being Polybius, Diodorus, Appian, and Plutarch, but they were no contemporaries and possessed no inside view of Iranian traditions. Furthermore, the Seleucid monarchs operated in a cultural environment which does not show the same tendencies of literary textualization as the classical Mediterranean world. The Perso-Iranian culture displays no literary self-reflection, which means that we have to consult different sources when talking about the eastern regions. For that reason, the Seleucid coinage is a very important medium to analyze the Seleucid dynasty in different ways. This will allow us a glimpse of the ruler's intention in regard to political, religious, or social issues. Moreover, the coins were minted in large quantities, providing exceptionally good evidence. In addition, inscriptions and the cultic buildings allow for interpretations of their functions and religious practices. However, the same problem applies to this material as to the literary sources. Beyond Mesopotamia and Babylonia in particular, the body of evidence is very sparse, so it remains very difficult to get reliable perceptions from the ancient sources concerning the Seleucid Empire in the East. That being said, let us now take a closer look at the structure of the first generations of the Seleucid royal family. The first evidence for sustainable contact between Seleucus and the Iranian world is the marriage of Alexander Pistis and the Bactrian princess Apame at the Susa weddings in 324. Alexander himself was responsible for the ceremony, which was designed to unite the Greco-Macedonian and the Perso-Iranian world by marriage alliances of himself and his officers with local noble women. Thereby, he intended to link the local elites of the northeastern regions to his family. Besides the three women wedded to Alexander, the written sources only mention the name of the brides of Hephaestion, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. It is noteworthy that only Seleucus married a woman from the far eastern regions, from Sogdia to be precise. Apame was the daughter of the Hipparch Spitamenus, who was one of the leaders of the Bactrian-Sogdian resistance against Alexander. Furthermore, the marriage of Seleucus and Apame is the only known case of the Susa weddings that persisted beyond Alexander's death. Seleucus might have realized early on how important his marriage with the Iranian aristocrat Apame was for him, a true Macedon and Hetaeros of Alexander, for establishing and legitimizing his position in the Iranian world. From the very beginning, the Seleucid Empire constituted an alliance between West and East, with its first royal couple embodying the symbiosis of the Greco-Macedonian and the Iranian culture. The long marriage of Seleucus and Apame led to the second aspect of Seleucid-Iranian contact, their son and heir Antiochus, who was probably born shortly after 324. Antiochus was a living example for the merging of West and East and unique on that score. The acceptance and influence of his mother was the perfect base for Antiochus to gain his own legitimation as co-regent and a capable heir to the throne. However, Antiochus' great weakness was his missing connection to the Greco-Macedonian world if he wanted to establish himself as king of the whole Seleucid Empire. To offset this handicap, Antiochus pushed for a marriage with a woman from a reputable Macedonian family. Stratonike, the daughter of Demetrius Poliorcetes and Phila, met these requirements. She was also the granddaughter of Antigonus and Antipatros, two companions of Philip II. By the marriage with this royal woman, Antiochus was able to establish an equal symbiosis of West and East like his father. It should be mentioned that Stratonike had been first married to Seleucus himself in 300 to confirm an alliance with her father, Demetrius. As we have heard, the ancient sources often tell that Antiochus fell in love with his stepmother, and to please his son, Seleucus gave him his second wife. However, the story is probably a literary motive, since the political reasons of this decision are quite obvious. Seleucus had one child with Stratonice already, a girl named Phila, who was later married to her uncle Antigonus II Gonatas. Since too many children from different wives could undermine the stability of a dynasty, as in the dynasty of Lysimachus or later under Antiochus II, Seleucus solved this problem by transferring Stratonice to Antiochus. In addition, Antiochus gained a suitable wife to legitimize his rulership over the whole Seleucid Empire. Coming back to our question, we might state that from the very beginning, the Seleucid dynasty was in contact with the Iranian culture in a political or dynastic way. The marriage alliances of the first two Seleucids constitute the base for the dynasty's long rule, especially in the eastern regions. This symbiosis of West and East created something very new, because the dynastic base of rulership in the Seleucid Empire was neither exclusively Greco-Macedonian nor Perso-Iranian, it was Seleucid. Let us now move on to our next point and take a closer look at the main deities and their function in Seleucid times. Although sources are sparse and often difficult to attribute specifically, several archaeological projects have excavated the main cities of western Iran, Babylonia, and the Bactrian regions. These excavations have unearthed a lot of buildings and remains of cultic and religious places. The evidence suggests that the original Iranian or Babylonian gods were venerated and that these gods were often connected to their Greek pendant in a syncretic way. For example, in Persepolis, we can find the so-called Photerica temple, where the pillars indicate a veneration of the water goddess Anahita. The inscription of excavated limestone plaques suggests her connection with the Greek goddess Artemis. The Hellenistic Artemis is also connected with the formerly Sumerian deity Nanaya, which was the main goddess of the most important temple in Susa. In Persian context, Nanaya is again recognized as Anahita, so at this point we have a circle of the pendants, Anahita, Nanaya, Artemis. Ecbatana also features a sanctuary for Anahita Artemis in existence since Achaemenid times. We find another cultic place in Tahti Sangin near the Amudaya in Bactria for the river god Oxus, which shows a lot of parallels to the mentioned Photerica temple of Persepolis. Although the ritual place for Oxus is shaped in an indigenous or Bactrian way, researchers also found a statuette dedicated by Atrozochus, a name of Iranian provenience. The inscription and the iconography of the statuette, however, is Greek, providing another case for the syncretism of the indigenous and the Greco-Macedonian religion, which can be called the Seleucid way of religious practice. In regard to the Mesopotamian pantheon, Marduk, later named Bel from Babylon, and Nabu from Borsippa, seem to have formed the main focus in Seleucid times. Bel Marduk was worshipped in the temple Ekasila, and the most important ritual fest was the spring festival Akitu, in which the divine world order made by Marduk was renewed. In this context, it is important to mention that Antiochus III took part in this festival in 205 BCE. It is the only proven participation of a Seleucid monarch in this spring festival. Initially worshipped as the god of chirography and wisdom, in later times Nabu was venerated as the son of Marduk. His main temple was the Etzida in Borsippa. In Hellenistic times, Nabu was connected with Apollon. His wife was Nanaya, which suggests that the worship of the married couple of Nabu and Nanaya in Mesopotamia symbolizes the worship of the Greek divine pair of siblings, Apollon and Artemis, which Strabon mentions for later times in Borsippa. For Babylonia especially, we have a lot of testimonia that the Seleucid kings cared for the local deities. This can be explained twofold. On the one hand, Seleucus started establishing his empire in Babylonia, from where he went on to capture the eastern regions. Here he founded his first and most important city, Seleucia on the Tigris. Antiochus also paid a lot of attention to the Babylonian or Mesopotamian heartland, shown by the foundation of Antiocheia on the Orontes and the famous Antiochus cylinder from Borsippa, a cuneiform text in which Antiochus emphasizes his supremacy of Nabu. On the other hand, the evidence of ancient sources from Babylonia is much better than for all the other eastern regions of the Seleucid Empire, which of course distorts our perspective quite a bit. In total, all of these aspects underline the important role of the symbiosis of indigenous and Greek deities for Seleucid rule. Let us now turn to the other famous Seleucid, Antiochus III. Under his reign, the Seleucid Empire managed to briefly regain its original extent and power. In many ways, Antiochus tried to imitate the actions of his great-great-grandfather to legitimize his rule and to increase his own reputation. Moreover, we can find different aspects concerning the rulership of Antiochus III, which were often seen as imitating either the Achaemenid kings or Alexander III, and led to the invention of the Epiteton Megas in Seleucid times. Under Antiochus III, it occurs as a specification of the ruling title for the first time. On the other hand, the reign of Antiochus III saw the establishment of some kind of dynastic or ruler cult for the whole Seleucid Empire, which was quite late in contrast to other Hellenistic dynasties. This brings us to the question of Antiochus' self-representation. As we can see on the stemma, Antiochus was the second son of Seleucus II and Laodice, while Seleucus I and Antiochus I had been able to keep the family and the empire together. The reign of Antiochus II and Seleucus II was characterized by numerous dynastic, political, and military conflicts. After the murder of his brother Seleucus III in Asia Minor, after only 3 years after his succession in 226, Antiochus III was unexpectedly responsible for restoring the Seleucid kingdom to its former glory and boundaries. Unjustifiably, modern research somewhat belittles the Eastern campaign, which Antiochus started in 212 by recapturing the seceded satrapies of Armenia, Partha, Bactria, and India. This is the more curious since it is presented as a highly important military mega-event in the sources. This is shown by the fact that after his return in 254, Antiochus was subsequently addressed as king with the Epiteton Megas in epigraphic sources for the first time in Greek. Additionally, 2 decrees from Amazon dated to 202 and 201, and 1 decree from Theos dated to around 203, mention the formulas Basileonton, Antiochou, Megalou, kai Antiochou Niou, or Basileus Antiochos Megas. These were usually employed primarily in a cultic context, and the written sources also connected the achievement of the Epiteton with Antiochus' success in the eastern territories. For instance, Appian begins his Syrian book with a description of Antiochus, who marched into Media, Partha, and other seceded territories, who performed many great things, and who also received the Epiteton Megas. All these aspects indicate that before 201, the Epiteton Megas was merely a nickname, coming from cultic context and had nothing to do with the title Great King. From about 199-98 onwards, there is some evidence for different use of megas. In different letters or inscriptions, mostly connected to cultic context, we can find formulas like Basileus Megas Antiochos. It is also noticeable that these sources are mainly from the western regions, massed around Coele-Syria and Cilicia. This evidence leads to the conclusion that from about 197, Antiochus adopted the Oriental or Sumerian title Great King, which was very common or well known in the regions of the former Achaemenid Empire. But he changed its meaning in such a way that it chiefly addressed his main enemy in the fight for Coele-Syria, the Ptolemies. The evidence also suggests that the use of the full title Great King was restricted to ceremonious and solemn circumstances at first. It seems that especially officials and the wider populace used the full title in inscriptions either to legitimize their matter in a special way or because the title Great King was the usual way to address the ruler of the empire in these parts. The use of the title Great King, therefore, was important in the conflict with the Ptolemies because it reacted to the acclamation of Ptolemy III as Great King after his invasion of the Seleucid Empire in 246. So it is very important to distinguish between these two phenomena. While Antiochus assumed the Epitheton Megas after his victory in the Eastern Campaign after 254, his adoption of the previous Oriental title Basileus Megas after 200 was linked to a conflict with the Ptolemies about the heritage of Seleucus in Coele-Syria, which was rooted in the very beginning of the Seleucid Empire. Neither the reference to the Persian-shaped Achaemenid culture nor the connection with the Greco-Macedonian traditions of Alexander were the main focus. Again, the Seleucid king adopted a well-known phenomenon based on both Iranian and Greco-Macedonian origins, but gave it a new Seleucid shape. Another aspect we have to investigate concerning the reign of Antiochus is the invention of the ruler cult in the eastern regions. In the western part of the Seleucid Empire, some kind of dynastic cult had started right after the death of Seleucus I. His son Antiochus gave the order to deify his father, thus introducing cultic worship for the Seleucid ancestors. This was quite common for the Mediterranean world, where the ruler cult appeared in late classical times when the Samians venerated the Spartan general Lysander with cultic honors as a type of a divine personality cult. This kind of godlike honors for human beings grew further under Alexander and the following reign of the Diadochoi. However, we do not find any indication in the eastern regions of the great king having been worshipped as a god. The ruler was rather something like the representative of the highest god. Thus, we should not be surprised that we do not find any evidence for such a honoring of the ruler before the edict between Antiocheia in Persis and Magnesia on the Menander from 205 in the eastern regions. This inscription gives the first hint for such practices in the east by addressing Seleucus with the epitheton Nikator. We cannot define exactly when Antiochus ordered to establish some kind of official ruler cult, but his return from his eastern campaign in 254 may fit well. As we have seen after his campaign, Antiochus started bearing the Epitheton Megas, and the first epigraphic evidence for this invention dated back to 202. Therefore, at this moment, a Seleucid ruler cult had already been established. Besides the edict from Antiocheia in Persis, there are 3 other edicts from 193 mentioning that Antiochus gave the order to establish a cult for his wife's sister Laodice and to put this cult on equal footing with the ruler cult. The 3 edicts were found in different areas, one in Phrygia near to Eretza, the second in Laodicean Media, and the third nearby Kermanshah. We can also detect hints for a practiced Seleucid ruler cult in Antiocheia in Persis, so we may assume that Antiochus aimed to establish the Seleucid ruler cult in the whole empire. Unfortunately, we do not have any explicit evidence for the practice of the cult beyond the Persis, but it is very likely that the fragments of pillars found in Nihavand with cultic origin are connected to a cult mentioned in the edict from Laodicea in Media. In conjunction, this suggests that up to the 2nd century BCE, it was easier for the Seleucid rulers to establish a ruler cult for a living person in the western Iranian regions that were more influenced by Greek and Macedonian traditions than in the far eastern regions of the empire. But the main focus for establishing the ruler cult was to venerate the deceased ancestors, the living monarch, and finally also the ruler's wife, in order to create a collective identity and to unify all parts of the kingdom. All ethnic groups were to have the chance to participate in one cult for the ruling dynasty, but in their own way. We cannot identify exactly if all parts of the population took part in worshipping the ruler. Maybe it mainly addressed the Greek and the Hellenized Orientals. It is also impossible to clarify in detail if the ruler cult was practiced in the Mesopotamian cities. Epigraphic sources suggest that there existed the sacrifice anubultu, that means for the life of the king, but it was not part of the ruler cult itself. The Seleucid ruler was worshipped in Mesopotamian tradition in Babylonia and not as part of the new established ruler cult, although this does not seem to have bothered the Seleucid dynasty. The Seleucid rulers might not even have known the difference between the veneration of the living ruler and the veneration of the life of the ruler, or if they had known it, it would not have been important as long as the inhabitants participated in the identical veneration of the ruler. In sum, these developments show that it was not before the reign of Antiochus III and the turn of the 3rd to the 2nd century that the Seleucid rulers initiated a Greek practice for stabilizing their rule. But the evidence once again suggests that it was a genuinely Seleucid measure which turned the dynastic cult into a practice in which every part of the empire was able to participate in its own specific way of worship. Finally, I would like to focus on Seleucid coinage, which features a wide range of religious symbolism. Coins differ from other evidence insofar as they were a medium by which the rulers were able to get in contact with the monetarized population. In our case, coins have another important benefit by working without text, instead transporting their message by iconographic impression and symbols. Especially in the eastern parts, coins were therefore a very suitable medium to transport the Seleucid political and socio-religious claim of power. Seleucid coins are very diverse in regard to the spectrum of iconographic symbols, but also in regard to the nominal, since coins were printed according to the Attic monetary standard, but also according to the Oriental monetary standard in a few cases. In this, the Seleucid kings contrast greatly with other Hellenistic monarchs like the Ptolemies. As to the deities presented, Seleucus was responsible for the output of coins featuring Baal in Babylon, Seleucia on the Tigris, Ecbatana in Susa. This drew on the coinage of Matsaios, the former satrap of Cilicia, who had minted coins according to the Persian standard with Baal of Tarsus. After 331, Matsaios continued in minting this type of coins according to the Attic standard in Babylonia. From Macedonian times onwards, Baal was probably interpreted as the highest god Zeus or Bel Marduk. The depicted gods were primarily Greek, with Seleucus choosing Zeus and his successors Apollon. It is also remarkable that the iconographic illustration does not follow the tradition of Alexander, but shows a genuine Seleucid program. This is particularly obvious in the illustration of Apollon sitting on the omphalos as a kingly archer with arrow and bow. On the one hand, we have the famous and well-known Greek god Apollon, who was a symbol of identification for the Greek and Macedonian parts of the Seleucid Empire. And on the other hand, the depiction as an archer also refers to the Achaemenid symbols of power and rule. Apollon, in guise of the archer, thus addressed both parts of the Seleucid Empire in a new and unique way. Besides the syncretic illustration of famous deities, we find a lot of animal illustrations known from the Greek and Macedonian homeland with connection to Eastern traditions. For example, the depiction of a walking lion or lions in principle signifies female deities in the Oriental culture, and therefore these coins were also linked to the Iranian representation of gods on the one side. In Greek and Macedonian context, the lion commemorates Heracles and Alexander III and would have been recognized as a symbol of power. In the same way, the depictions of horses played an important role, which might have commemorated Bucephalos, the famous horse of Alexander. This view is principally taken by scholars who see the main character of the Seleucid rule in the succession of Alexander. Secondly, the written sources report that in 316, during his escape from Antigonus to Ptolemy, Seleucus was only saved by the speed of his horse, and the Seleucid cavalry also played a crucial role at the Battle of Kuropedion, in which Seleucus defeated Lysimachus. The depiction of horned horses might thus refer to divine favor in these cases. One aspect is common to all of these views. In Greek and Macedonian understanding, the depiction of horses stands for the military successes of the Seleucid ruler. However, the horses also drew on strong Eastern traditions, whose origin Herodotus places in Hippobotus in Media by the famous Nisaean horses. The third and most common animal symbol on Seleucid coins is the bull, or the horn of the bull, as pars pro toto. It is very often presented as part of a helmet in connection to depictions of horses or elephants or the portraits of the ruler. Moreover, the horn is one of the oldest Oriental symbols, especially for divinity, power, and strength. For example, the Sumerian understanding of the name of Marduk was calf of the sun. The horn, in principle, is therefore the clearest and commonest connection between Greek and Oriental motives. In addition, Appian reports that during a sacrifice of Alexander, Seleucus killed a bull with his bare hands. And thus, the bull is also a sign of the Seleucid power and success. So, by the use of the depiction of bulls or bull horns, the Seleucid kings from the beginning commemorated Iranian or indigenous cult traditions and showed their respect for them. In the same way, they distanced themselves from their Macedonian predecessors in the eastern regions and pursued a policy of tolerance. Similar, the eagle and the blizzard also served as pars pro toto symbolism, representing power in both Greek and Oriental customs. Therefore, the Seleucid rulers used the iconographic program of their coins to establish a connection between all parts of their empire, using and adapting well-known images to a new symbolism which served as a universal base for Seleucid rule. In conclusion, we have seen that the Seleucid rulers were frequently confronted with Iranian traditions, either in a religious, cultural, or socio-political way. Concerning the establishment of the dynastic family by marriage alliances, we have seen that Seleucus was well aware of the importance of the Iranian element for strengthening his claim to power. As first successor, Antiochus was unique in his half Macedonian and half Iranian descent. In my opinion, this mixed heritage was the origin of a truly unique Seleucid blending of Greco-Macedonian traditions with the Eastern Iranian or Oriental traditions. This new blend changed the components' meaning to a new Seleucid imperial identity, which contrasted with both the Achaemenid and the Macedonian predecessors, and propagated a new integrated empire for all its people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Richter. Thank you all. I know it's been a long day and we can smell the delicious reception waiting for us, but I know that some of us will have questions for our speakers for the last session today. And I think Marissa has the microphone for you. Yes. So, Johannes, yes.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed both papers enormously. They were rich and very suggestive. I have an immediate question for Sonja while everyone mulls over their response. So you described very attractively how the Seleucids tried to integrate the sort of Eastern Iranian half of their empire. Can I be crude and suggest that it didn't work very well, or it doesn't seem to have worked very well? And could you say a little bit more about that? Why did Antiochus III find himself in a position where he had to, as it were, reconquer his old empire? Why was there constant? Was trouble constant in the Iranian East? And if it was, or was almost constant, why?
Yes, of course. I shorted this talk a little bit because, I would like to say so many things, and so I put out the part about the developments on the Antiochus II and Seleucus II and Seleucus III up to Antiochus III. As we have seen, Seleucus I and Antiochus I were able to keep the empire together, but under Antiochus II, the problem occurs that I've just mentioned it by the way. We have different wives, we have a lot of children. Antiochus II didn't say who will be the co-regent, who will be his successor. And so within the Seleucid family, there occurs a lot of struggle. And I think that was the main problem, and this main problem was the base for the local tendencies for successions in Parther and Bactria, especially. Armenia, maybe the Perses is a next question, but at the end of the rule of Antiochus the second, there were so many struggles within the dynasty that a lot of satrapies or satraps tried to establish their own rule. And that was that this could happen. That was based on, from my point of view, on local traditions since the Achaemenid Empire. And for that case, Antiochus III was responsible, or had the task to put the empire together. Seleucus III just reigned for 3 years, so there was not so much time. But it's difficult to say in which measure or how much the succeeded satrapies, especially Bactria and Parther, were independent under Antiochus II. It's hard to say it. Perhaps they were something like in a vassal status, or they were really independent. But it's difficult to distinguish. Yeah. Long answer to a short question, or okay.
I would like to thank personally all of the speakers, the audience, your wonderful questions. Thank you to the speakers for answering our questions, and I look forward to tomorrow, and thank you all for a great afternoon.